Instead of talking about control, we could just say pressure. Could use the word pressure instead. And maybe pressure's better because we instinctively know that psychologically speaking, too much pressure isn't good. Whereas control, we can't help thinking, yeah, control's good. Get me some more control, please. If only I had the control, then everything would be good. Everything would be all right. So there's there's less of that going on with pressure because no one really wants too much pressure. So we can focus on, just to start off with, anxiety, as we did before. And instead of saying that anxiety really is predicated upon the unconscious need to have control, where this isn't legitimate, we could say that anxiety comes about as a result of too much pressure. So as I go about my day-to-day activities, no matter what they are, there's two ways I can do them. I can do them lightly without placing too much emphasis on the outcome. Is it going to work? Is it not going to work? Or I can do it all, whatever I'm doing, for the reason of some outcome. Therefore, the thing I'm doing isn't so important. It's what's important is whether I get out of it what I want to get out of it. I'm outcome driven. I'm driven by ends, by goals. Which is very normal. We do that an awful lot. And it's legitimate enough in some cases. But when the whole of our lives becomes kind of tainted by this unspoken and basically unconscious need to obtain some kind of outcome, then that's anxiety. That's the beginning of anxiety. It could be the beginning of other neurotic forms of neurotic suffering as well, but it's the beginning of anxiety. Because we're skipping ahead in our heads to the outcome, because that's what matters, not the actual living. So living becomes subordinate to a good outcome. But a good outcome is just an abstract notion in our heads. Life doesn't have good outcomes in it. It doesn't have any outcomes in it. An outcome is how we think about things. We just look at a thing we want, and whether it's important or not, we make it important by focusing on it and saying, yes, if this outcome happens, then everything is good. Everything's going to be okay. So then the outcome becomes this huge thing. But there's no such thing as outcomes in life. Life isn't about getting an outcome. Suppose you do get an outcome. It's possible to get an outcome. And what the hell are you going to do with it? An outcome is like, duh, this has happened. We've got it. But what is it? There is no it to get. An outcome is like a conclusion. Life never concludes. It's always ongoing. And in the same way, there's never any outcomes. But when we adopt the way of looking at things that says there has to be an outcome, then life is playing second fiddle to our ideas, to our thoughts. So that's a recipe for having a bad time. And when our thoughts become more important than life, our thoughts kind of like a little comment we make on things. We just write this little comment with a marker pen on a piece of glass or something, just squiggle this little comment on it, and that becomes all important, which is ridiculous because that comment isn't there. We made it be there, and then we act as if we didn't make it be there. So the whole thing is, as I said in the last, I think the last installment, it's a private game. It only matters because I say it matters, and I don't realise that it only matters because I say it matters. So then I'm pretty lost at that stage. I'm pretty lost in the game. That's what everyday life is very largely about. It's about being lost in the game. It's not a great thing from the point of view of actually being genuinely alive and experiencing life in a wholesome way. Because a game is a small thing like that. So when I'm lost in the game without knowing that I'm lost in the game, I've made myself awfully small. Like I've fitted into this small thing, but I don't know that I fitted into a small thing, because a small thing is all there is to me now. Because having become lost in the game, I don't know it's a game. I think it's reality. So I've kind of adapted myself to a very petty reality, which isn't reality, but for me it is. For me, it's the beginning and the end, the alpha and the omega. This isn't a strange thing I'm talking about, inasmuch as we utilize the thinking mind carelessly, which is to say, without really noticing that that's what we're doing. We're all in a petty artificial world. We're all in this type of compulsive virtual reality. The mind-created compulsive virtual reality. The key characteristic, we could say, of this compulsive virtual reality is that there's always pressure. This is pressure world. So we say, well, pressure isn't for human beings, pressure is for tires. It's good saying. Pressure is certainly useful for tires. It's not so good if you don't have any pressure in your tires. But so we say that, so what? Actually, pressure is good for conditioned human beings living in the conditioned reality, which is all of us. Why is it good? Because that's our one motivating force. That's what gets us to do stuff. Pressure. Take away the pressure and we don't do feck all. Not when we're in this mechanical mode. And that's very easy to understand. We all understand that. It's like if I got a little clockwork toy and I don't keep the pressure up by winding the spring taut, that clockwork toy stops. It needs the external motivation of the spring to make it. It doesn't get up and do stuff by itself. So the biggest assumption in rational culture is that we're all machines, everything's a machine. We don't have a concept of non-machine, really. And so it comes naturally to us to think that we have to operate under the rule of extrinsic motivation. We won't do anything unless we're made to do it, or we make ourselves to do it. So society forces us to do it, or we force ourselves to do it. And actually those two things come out to be the same thing, because society doesn't need to force me to do anything, because if I am aware of the expectations that exist in society, I will force myself to try to meet those expectations. So I'm my own prisoner, really. And the tricky thing is, if I do get a notion, well, this is all rotten, only doing stuff because I tell myself to do it, because I force myself, because I have to push myself to do it. So if the thought comes to me, oh, this is rotten, it's exhausting, fruitless, there's no joy in it, it's just a grind, a terrible grind, a chore, an ordeal of do the thing and then do the next thing and then do the next thing after that, not because there's any real genuine meaning to it, but because we say that there is, or the thinking mind tells us that there is. So we could have that notion and we could get really worn out, but the thing is, at that point, if we stop forcing ourselves, nothing happens, because we're so used to running on extrinsic motivation. It's like our fuel, that we're addicted to it. We need it in order to function. We have neglected the spontaneous side of our nature so much that it's just kind of given up, and it's like, what the hell, I'm not needed here, really. That's what always happens with neglect. If I sit in bed for a couple of months and don't do much, my muscles there, what the hell, they'll shrivel, they will get weaker and weaker. And it's exactly the same with spontaneous motivation or intrinsic motivation that really comes out of the heart of us, the vitality of us, the actual living nature of us, not from some external robotic viewpoint which computes what's a good outcome and what isn't a good outcome. So intrinsic motivation is life. There's no one saying anything has to happen, but there's a kind of flow to it, and a natural exuberance. We don't have to be told about this. If we are told about it, it becomes the external viewpoint platform of the mind telling us you have to do this, you have to do that, in order to obtain whatever abstract outcome. We don't have to be told to be spontaneous, because we can't be told to be spontaneous, because even if I try my best to obey when I'm told to be spontaneous, I'm now conforming. So instead of being creative, I am copying I'm copying some template that has been placed there for me to copy. So in other words, what I'm coming at is that if we are habituated to doing everything as a result of pressure that I'm putting on myself, or pressure that essentially it all comes down to pressure that I'm putting on myself anyway, and I suddenly stop because I realize this is unsustainable, untenable, and is no good at all. Maybe in a short term, if I'm feeling really sick or something and I have to do something that's urgent, I'll push myself. That's fine. We can do that every now and again, but not fine to live the whole of our lives on that basis. Absolutely not fine. We're doing something wrong if we're doing that. But when it comes to me and I become overwhelmed by this terrible feeling of not wanting to be in this hamster wheel, nothing's going to happen. And so I'm trapped. Well, if I don't force myself to do the stuff, it's not going to happen. I'm just going to sit here, and that's no good, because I need to do stuff. So that it's not as easy to go from the conditioned life where everything operates on the basis of extrinsic motivation. It's not so easy at all to give it up as a bad deal and go back to being spontaneous like children are. We've already been ruined. It's hard to go back. You can't. An adult cannot become a child again in that way. Even though I can see that, well, as a child, life is so much bigger and the possibilities are so more. I enjoy stuff more. I'm much more playful, much more truly alive. That doesn't mean I can do being a child. As a sophisticated adult, I could see this. I could actually see the truth of it, and I can try to do something about it. But everything I try to do something about it adds another level of complication and artificiality to the adult that I already am. So there's nothing more artificial and overcomplicated than an adult who's trying to approximate a child, or to be more childlike. That's like when grown-up writers try to write for children, and they kind of think they know what children like, and so they write in this way. That's not the inner child writing in the author. That's the adult making this hideous, grotesque attempt to be a child. And there's nothing more rotten than that. You're much better off being a robotic adult than being a robotic adult trying to mimic a child. It's just more hard work. It's all done on purpose. It's all done for an outcome. What's the outcome? Obviously, this is going to make things better if I can be more spontaneous. So we really are in a trap here. So in one way, we can look at the whole gamut of neurotic suffering and say, all of that, no matter what it is, will be cured if I can switch from doing mode to being mode, from adult mode to child mode, from everything being purposeful for a reason to just doing stuff just because you feel like doing it, which is kind of like stuff doing itself through you, which is how life happens. Life, like a sneeze, it happens through us. The experience is that a sneeze happens through us. We are sneezed. And the same thing with life. The experience of life is that life happens through us. I don't think about what life is, and oh yeah, I've got this idea, it's life. I'm going to enact my idea, my theory, my hypothesis of what life is. That's not life. That's neurosis. So even though we can say quite legitimately that being more spontaneous is the answer to neurotic suffering. It doesn't help us any. It just tempts us to try to be something that we can never be by trying. So then at that point, we kind of realize that this whole thing about not controlling isn't as easy as all that. Because the prejudice is to think that not controlling is simple. It's too simple. How can not controlling help me? What we think can help us in mental health is complicated, sophisticated, evidence-based forms of intervention, forms of controlling. So we kind of think, yeah, that's what I want. The more sophisticated and complicated, the more impressed I am. The more kind of qualified the person that comes up with it, like if they're a professor and they're this and they're that and they've got loads of letters after them, and it's like, wow, yeah, this is the really good stuff because it's academic-y stuff, and if I can't read it because it's so bloody academic, so much the better. This is obviously the real deal, the good stuff. That's got to be good. But it isn't. That's just adult complication. That's just neurosis. Academia is neurosis. Life isn't like that. You don't find out anything from academic papers on how to live life. You might do on smaller topics, but on the big topic of how to live life, you can't get that from an academic paper. So we tend to think that controlling is where it's at, which is the same thing as technology. The more sophisticated and advanced our controlling stroke technology is, the better it's going to be for us in terms of dealing with our problems. That's not true at all, though, because trying to live life via controlling stroke technology is our problem. Boy, it's one hell of a problem. It's a real rotten problem. It's a bad one. We've got it bad too. We have that problem really bad. And the main reason we have it so bad is because we don't even see it as a problem. We see it as a solution. We see this kind of rational, technological, manipulative approach to life as being the solution. And if we haven't solved it yet, that's because we haven't learned to manipulate in a sophisticated enough way. So really, this is a pure fantasy of the ego, which can only operate by manipulating conditions to suit itself. If it didn't do that, it would evaporate, because the ego, the idea, the experience we have of being me, or you have of being you, can only live, can only exist, can only remain tenable when it manipulates meaning so that everything that it experiences suits what it wants to perceive. So it has to be a gatekeeper for itself and create a false conditioned reality for itself the whole time in order that it can exist, because it wouldn't exist for even a picosecond outside of that protective false artificial environment that it creates for itself. And yet, what's the point in it existing anyway? Because that isn't who we are. And when we think that it is that is who we are, that brings us a life of misery and frustration. So even though we might say, oh, it's a terrible problem, we can't solve it, it's not really a terrible problem because we wouldn't want to solve it. Not that we could, but if we could, I mean, that would only make things worse. And it seems like a terrible problem, but it's not a serious problem. So it's not serious at all. So we're always looking for the complicated and the more advanced and the people with letters after their names to come up with these evidence-based kind of results and research and whatever crap. And really it is crap. It has nothing to do with mental health. That's just farming out your mental health to a bunch of academics who are stuck in their heads and don't know how to live life, which is the disease of our rational technological society. So the answer is in us. Only we can learn to be spontaneous, and spontaneous means not controlling so much that we can actually allow a gap for life to happen. And our prejudice is to see this as being too stupid, too easy to be the answer to anything, but it isn't easy. It isn't easy at all. We don't even know what difficult means until we actually come face to face with this problem of somehow extricating us from the purposeful, rational mess we've got ourselves into by thinking about everything too much and by thinking about ourselves too much and having ideas about everything that we get trapped in, having games that we get trapped in. So we don't even know the meaning of the word difficult until we actually get stuck in that and start to work with that. So if I perceive that I'm doing everything because I'm pressurizing myself to do it, which means that every behavior I'm involved in, instead of just doing it, I'm standing over myself the whole time with a stick saying, make it happen, try harder, make it happen, the thing must happen, the thing must happen. And that's totally inane and utterly, horrifically counterproductive way. Too much pressure. The simplest thing, I have to be beating myself to make it happen, and then it doesn't happen because if I try and make it happen, it won't happen. And I can't see that because I'm too stuck in trying to make it happen. So my response to that little tangle is to try even harder, make myself suffer even more. So that's neurosis in a nutshell. So that's neurotic suffering in a nutshell. So even though I'm repeating myself, when I get to the point of seeing that, I can then say, okay, pressure's not good. So then I'm putting pressure on myself not to pressurize myself. I mustn't pressurize myself. Pressurizing myself is bad. I mustn't. So double layer of pressure, super pressure. If I was a tyro, I would have exploded a long time ago. And that would have been the best thing as well. But instead, I go on under this pressure. So then it's like, okay, controlling is the root of all the fact that I'm controlling everything and is the root of all my problems, therefore I mustn't control. But the controlling is the only thing I know. So then I control myself without even realizing the irony, so as not to control myself so much. So maybe we can get someone to come up with a theory about how to do that, some nice intellectual theory of the best way to control ourselves so as not to control. And that is, of course, that's just a joke, of course, because as soon as we say that, we realize, yeah, well, that's definitely not going to work. So what the hell do we do then? Everything I do just makes the problem worse. And even when I do nothing, I'm doing nothing on purpose in order to extricate myself from the predicament I'm in, which means that my not doing is then a doing. I'm doing not doing, which is a well-known thing. If we ever got into meditation, we try and do not doing. It's a phase you go through, like trying to do stillness or like do letting go, let go, I have to let go, I have to let go. So that's holding on to the idea of letting go. So this is what we run into whenever, and meditation is probably a good way to run into it quickly, because in meditation we're just letting it happen and noticing it happen without saying this is good and this is bad, etc., etc. We're just out of pure wonderment and interest in the process of what's going on. Have a look at it going on. Don't rush in and try and control it. How the hell would you know what you're supposed to be doing anyway? Do you know, out of the depths of our utter ignorance and fear. That's the kind of amalgam. That's the alloy that unconsciousness is based on. I come up with an idea of how things should go. Not going to be a very good idea, is it? So this is what we run into. We run into this thing, this difficulty. It's a subtle difficulty. And we have to get subtle in order to work through it. But if we are to get subtle, we have to drop the thinking mind, because the thinking mind is never subtle. It only knows yes and no. It only knows assert and deny. It only knows right and wrong. It's all based on rules. Rules aren't subtle. They're about as subtle as a brick in the face. You never solve neurotic problems or life. Not that life needs to be solved, but if we are trying to solve the difficulties that we're running into in life with rules or methods, so a rule put into practice is a method, that's crude. It's crude. It's like using the very thing that caused the problem to solve the problem. So we have to let go of the thinking mind and gain access to a subtler level of things. Thank you.